Today, we are going to look at the most horrifying footage of brutal bear encounters, from an Instagram model who came too close for comfort, a bear who barged in inside a home, killing the owner. Let's dive straight in. It was August 17th, 2018, in Glacier National Park, Montana. The morning was cool and clear, sunlight cutting through the valley fog. It was the kind of day that drew hikers, photographers, and tourists out early. But for one visitor, the stillness ahead of noon would end violently. Riley Voss, 24, had flown from San Diego the week before. She wasn't famous, but she was trying to be. Her social media feed, 3,000 followers, mostly friends and classmates, was filled with beach sunsets, thrift store fashion, and now the outdoors. She wanted a new direction, wilderness content. She told people she was building a cottagecore adventure vibe. She had read articles about Glacier's beauty and bought all the right gear: new hiking boots, a neon windbreaker, a small tripod, and bear spray. Her parents thought the trip was spontaneous but harmless. She'd saved enough from part-time photography gigs to fund it. Riley's friends didn't see her as a risk-taker. She was simply inexperienced and probably thought she knew more than she did. She wasn't camping deep in the backcountry. She chose accessible trails where she could still get cell service and frame aesthetic shots of lakes and trees. That morning, she texted one of her friends her plan: to find the alder grove where the sunlight broke through like stained glass and take a photo in front of it. Glacier's grizzly population, around 300 individuals, was stable but closely monitored. Females with cubs were notoriously defensive. Weighing around 400 pounds, they could sprint up to 30 miles per hour and crush bone with a bite force exceeding 1,000 psi. Rangers drilled these facts into visitors daily, reminding them to make noise, hike in groups, and carry bear spray in hand, not buried in a pack. Riley had seen the warning signs at the trailhead that morning, complete with an image of a mother bear and cub. Other tourists recalled her laughing quietly, taking a picture of the sign. She later posted that picture on her social media story, captioned, "I'll be fine, haha." The first mistake came early. She passed a pair of hikers heading back, who warned her about bear activity near the grove. They'd seen scat and heard huffing noises. She thanked them, said she'd be careful, and still continued. At a bend, she stopped to set up her tripod beside a thicket of alder and berry shrubs. The area was rich with late summer fruit, a perfect feeding ground for bears. The air smelled faintly of sweet berries and musk, something she didn't recognize. Her second mistake was silence. She didn't talk, sing, or make noise. She was focused on framing the shot, stepping backward, adjusting angles. She wasn't paying attention to what was 20 feet away, half hidden in brush. A female grizzly was there, feeding with her cub. The bear likely noticed Riley first, pausing during feeding. Grizzlies give warnings: huffs, head sways, jaw pops. Riley heard the sounds but mistook them for wind. She moved closer to the tripod, her camera taking multiple photos at once. In the pictures recovered later, the first ones showed her smiling toward the lens. Then, motion blurred behind her. Witnesses on the ridge above, two backpackers, heard the low roar before they saw her run. She bolted forward, stumbling in the tall grass, turning halfway back toward her pack. The bear charged, covering the ground in seconds. She yanked at her pack, fumbling for the bear spray but pulled out the wrong canister, an insect repellent. She sprayed it blindly, realizing too late it wasn't bear spray. The bear swiped, striking her shoulder. The impact spun her sideways, her scream cutting short. She fell hard, rolling once before the bear was on her. It pinned her to the ground, jaws clamping on her back. The witnesses later said the sound alone told the story. Short, confused, and then abruptly quiet. The grizzly tore through fabric and flesh, biting down along her spine and shoulder blades. One arm broke instantly. She kicked weakly, her boot scraping dirt. Witnesses shouted from the ridge, trying to make noise, but they were too far. The bear lifted its head briefly, huffed, then bit again at her neck and side. When it finally stepped off, she wasn't moving. The cub sniffed at her backpack before both disappeared into the brush. The attack lasted less than a minute. The backpackers managed to get a call through after hiking up the ridge for signal. When rangers arrived 40 minutes later, alerted by the witnesses, the site was silent. They found the insect repellent canister lying a few feet from her. Bear spray was still zipped inside her bag, unused. Her death scene was methodically documented. Deep claw marks lined her back and torso. The pattern of punctures matched a defensive mother bear's strike sequence. There was no sign she'd tried to climb or run uphill, just panic in the open. After reviewing the evidence, officials Officials euthanized the sow under Glacier's policy for defensive attacks near popular trails, confirming through necropsy that the incident wasn't predatory. Online, the story spread for a short period of time. Influencer mauled after mistaking bug spray for bear spray. Within days, it fed into jokes and outrage. Some called it tragic. Others called it stupid. Riley's parents flew to Montana to bring her home. For 3 days, the algorithm carried her image, and it faded. Another story replaced it, another reminder of how fast the wilderness punishes ignorance. But even as Riley's mistake faded from memory, in Los Angeles, a family's Sunday picnic would prove that feeding wild animals triggers irreversible consequences. It was May 10th, 2015, in a large public park in Los Angeles, California. Families spread blankets under sycamores, kids chased each other between tables, and the smell of charcoal drifted through the picnic area. No one there expected anything worse than a sunburn. Travis Linton, 29, worked construction in Burbank and liked to say rules were for people with no common sense. His wife, Megan, also 29, handled customer service for a car rental company. They were ordinary, working parents trying to make a Sunday special for their 3-year-old Caleb. They'd packed fried chicken, chips, and juice boxes. Megan wanted cute pictures for Facebook. Travis wanted to grill and relax. Neither of them cared much for park regulations. They'd seen the "Do Not Feed Wildlife" signs countless times and treated them like decoration. Coyotes were a familiar sight around the Los Angeles parks. Locals knew them as scrappy survivors, thin but bold, often slipping between picnic areas in daylight. Rangers warned repeatedly that feeding them made them aggressive. Still, visitors tossed food anyway: chips, hot dogs, even leftovers, to get close photos. The Lintons were no different. Travis thought it was funny, a harmless way to show his son a real animal. He didn't understand that these animals, lean 40-pound predators with jaws strong enough to crush a rabbit's spine, weren't pets or mascots. They moved silently when they wanted to, watching from brush lines with a patience most people mistook for curiosity. Were opportunists conditioned by human stupidity. That afternoon, the park looked deceptively peaceful. The air shimmered with heat, and the grass around the tables had gone patchy from drought. A coyote lingered in the tree line, its coat dull gray and tan, ribs faintly visible. Megan spotted it first. She pointed, phone in hand. Travis whistled and threw a potato chip. The coyote froze and crept closer, shoulders low, eyes fixed on the food. Another chip followed, and a chicken bone. Their visitors noticed but didn't intervene. People see coyotes often and assume they're harmless. The animal inched within 20 feet, head tilted, ears twitching. Travis kept throwing food, laughing, calling it friendly. Megan filmed from a few feet away, narrating. The coyote sat down, tail curled, waiting for more. When Caleb toddled from the blanket clutching a hot dog bun, neither parent stopped him. That was the final mistake, one that mixed ignorance, arrogance, and neglect. The coyote's instincts kicked in. It saw motion and food in one small, slow-moving target. Witnesses later said the attack happened fast. The animal darted forward in a blur of gray. Megan's phone dropped. The animal clamped its jaws around the child's neck, shaking once, dragging him several feet into the grass. The scream that followed wasn't from the child, it was from his mother. Travis lunged, tripping over the cooler. He reached the coyote and kicked it hard, then grabbed Caleb's arm and pulled. For several seconds, there was a horrific tug-of-war, Travis pulling his son by the arm, the coyote jerking at his neck. The animal finally let go after being startled due to the sound of shouting and multiple approaching footsteps. The coyote vanished into the trees. Caleb lay motionless on the ground, his shirt soaked through. Travis pressed his hand against the wounds, yelling for help, but it was useless. The bite had torn deep into his neck, severing major blood vessels. Witnesses described blood pooling fast in the dirt. Megan screamed for an ambulance, but every second dragged. Rangers and LAPD units arrived within 5 minutes after multiple 911 calls. They found Travis on his knees, shaking his son's shoulders, repeating his name. Paramedics took over, but the child had already gone pale. Wildlife officers located the coyote within the hour, near the base of a hill, and euthanized it on site. A necropsy performed by wildlife authorities confirmed stomach contents of chicken bones and chips. It had been fed repeatedly, likely by visitors over several months. Wildlife officers called it a textbook case of food conditioning. The park was cleared by evening, and a temporary closure went into effect the next morning. Some people blamed the park for not fencing off the area. Others blamed the parents. Travis and Megan left California within months. Their rental house went up for sale, the neighbors saying they never saw them them again. The park installed new warning signs with larger print and cited visitors under state wildlife feeding laws. Rangers said the same problem continued. People still tossing food, still taking pictures, still thinking it couldn't happen to them. It was July 22nd, 2014, in Yellowstone National Park, Wyoming. Families posed for pictures beside steaming vents, laughing at the sulfur smell. The warning signs about keeping distance from wildlife blended into the scenery, noticed but ignored. Before noon, though, a crowd would stand frozen in silence near the lower geyser basin, staring at the body of a man who learned too late that the signs weren't jokes. Darren Kopel was 45, an air conditioning technician from Kansas City. He'd driven his wife, Linda, and their 2 teenagers through the park that week in a rented SUV. It was their first real family vacation in years, planned after Linda's insistence that they see nature before the kids go to college. Darren had been unimpressed from day one. He'd complained about gas prices, the crowds, and the smell of sulfur. He was the kind of man who didn't believe in danger unless he saw it himself. To him, the park rangers were overcautious, the animals docile. He'd told his family repeatedly that bison were just big cows. He wasn't stupid in the way of not knowing better. He was stupid in the way of thinking he knew best. Every morning, he'd mock the posted warnings, reading them aloud in a sarcastic tone. He laughed at other tourists taking photos from the boardwalk, muttering that people were scared of grass eaters. When Linda told him about a news story of someone gored years prior, he brushed it off as bad luck. The irony was that Darren thought of himself as practical, a man who fixed machines for a living, used logic, and distrusted experts. The lower geyser basin was a wide, open stretch of steaming ground, dotted with boiling pools and herds of bison grazing on dry grass. The park's bison population numbered in the thousands, with mature bulls weighing up to 2,000 pounds and standing 6 feet tall at the shoulder. Despite their size, they could sprint at 35 miles per hour and pivot faster than a horse. Rangers warned that bison injured more people each year than bears or wolves combined. Still, people treated them like props for vacation photos, walking too close, speaking softly like they were tame. That morning, a bull bison grazed near the safety barrier, about 50 yards from the walkway. Tourists stopped to take pictures, content to keep their distance. Darren wasn't. His son filmed on a small camera as Darren climbed over the railing. Several witnesses later confirmed his wife's voice could be heard on the video telling him to stop. He waved her off and trudged toward the animal, grinning at onlookers. At about 20 feet, the bison lifted its head and stared. Darren stopped, shrugged, and turned around as if to pose. Someone in the crowd muttered that he was too close. He took another few steps forward, closing the gap to 10 feet. His daughter later said he wanted a natural shot, with the bison looking directly at him. He waved his arms in the air to get its attention. The bull's tail flicked once. It lowered its head and pawed the ground, a clear textbook warning. Several people on the boardwalk started backing away. Darren, grinning, kept his back turned, adjusting his hat. He never saw it start to move. The bison charged, its hooves striking hard and fast. Witnesses said the animal covered the distance in less than 2 seconds. The impact was brutal. The horn entered his abdomen just above the pelvis, lifting him clear off the ground. The force flipped him sideways, his body twisting unnaturally before hitting the dirt. For a moment, he lay motionless. Then the bull lunged again, hooking him beneath the ribs and throwing him several feet. His scream was short and sharp, ending abruptly as he hit the ground. The sound of the trampling was sickening, a thud and crunch that silenced the crowd. The bison stomped once on his chest before swinging its head and walking off, breathing hard, tail raised. Other tourists saw Linda run forward, dropping to her knees beside him, while screaming at them to call for help. Blood spread quickly through his shirt. The horn had torn through his abdomen and out his lower back, shattering ribs and rupturing internal organs. A ranger later stated that the injuries were not survivable. His eyes were open, but there was no recognition left. When rangers arrived minutes later, they secured the scene and pushed back the crowd. One ranger checked for a pulse, but shook his head almost immediately. Linda's hands were covered in blood. The kids stood several yards away, frozen. Paramedics declared him dead where he fell. The cause of death was listed as massive internal trauma due to bison goring. Rangers cleared the area, herded the animal away, and reopened the trail the next morning. The Park Service released a short statement reminding visitors that bison are unpredictable and can run 3 times faster than humans. It wasn't the first visitor injury that year, and it wouldn't be the last. His family refused interviews. They left the park that evening, driving straight back to Kansas City without stopping. A small local obituary ran 3 days later, omitting the details of how he died. As the bison's hooves left their final imprint on Darren in Florida, an exotic bird breeder would discover that calling cassowaries gentle giants means nothing when breeding season awakens their prehistoric fury. It was March 20 27, 2016, in Gainesville, Florida. On a small private property outside town, two cassowaries stalked their pen in slow circles. They were beautiful, prehistoric-looking birds, towering, black-feathered, crowned with hard casques. By nightfall, one of them would be pacing over the body of its owner. Elliot Crane was 38, a self-taught, exotic bird breeder who treated his backyard collection like a miniature zoo. He owned peafowl, emus, crowned cranes, and the cassowaries, his pride. He was known online in a small exotic pet forum as the guy who proved cassowaries could be handled safely with calm energy. His videos showed him hand-feeding fruit to them through the fence and bragging that they were misunderstood. In reality, he was a hobbyist who thought familiarity meant control. He wasn't malicious, just naive and overconfident, a dangerous mix when dealing with one of the deadliest birds on the planet. He ran the menagerie mostly alone, a few acres of pens and sheds behind his house. He made enough money breeding parrots and rare pheasants to fund his collection. Friends said he wanted to open a small educational park one day. That goal blinded him to risk. Wildlife officers had warned him twice about his cassowaries after being noted by his guests. Inspection reports later confirmed prior concerns about enclosure safety. He ignored them, claiming his birds were tame. He treated them like oversized pets, walking near them without a barrier, feeding by hand, and posting selfies from inside the enclosure. He convinced himself his familiarity meant safety. The cassowary pen sat at the back of the property, fenced with a 6-foot chain link, shaded by palms and overgrown ferns. That day, the ground was slick from the morning storm. The male cassowary, a 6-foot-tall, roughly 130-pound bird, had been especially agitated. It was breeding season, when males guard nests and become aggressively territorial. Cassowaries can sprint up to 30 miles per hour and leap over 5 feet in a single bound. Their inner claw, 5 inches long, acts like a dagger capable of slicing through flesh and bone. Wildlife officers describe them as living velociraptors, and that's not exaggeration. Elliot knew this. He just thought his hand-raised birds were different. The first mistake came early that afternoon. Neighbors said they heard him talking loudly in the pen, likely calling to the birds while cleaning. According to later scene reconstruction, he'd entered right after the rain stopped, boots slipping slightly on the wet mud. A long rake and a bucket of feed lay near the fence, signs he'd planned routine maintenance. One of the cassowaries was near the far end, pacing. The other, the male, was closer, its casque lowered slightly, feathers puffed. These were clear warnings. Elliot ignored them, like he always did. At some point, he slipped. The ground inside the pen had turned soft and uneven from the storm. Investigators later found a heel print skidded across a wet patch beside the water pan, then a broad smear where he hit the ground. That was the trigger. To a cassowary, sudden motion near its territory means threat. Witnesses weren't present, but the scene reconstruction told enough. He fell backward, scrambled, and likely made eye contact. The male closed the distance almost instantly. The first kick hit his thigh, the claws tearing through jeans and deep into muscle. The second connected higher, ripping open his groin and severing his femoral artery. He tried to roll away, leaving gouges in the mud where his hands clawed for traction. The cassowary kept striking, rapid two-legged jumps that brought both feet forward, each blow driving talons into soft tissue. The bird's weight and speed turned each kick into a weapon. Evidence showed defensive wounds on his arms and forearms, suggesting he tried to block the attacks, but it didn't matter because he was bleeding out in seconds. The screams carried beyond the property line. A neighbor later said they lasted less than 30 seconds, ending suddenly. By the time the neighbor arrived, the cassowary stood near the body, feathers fluffed, hissing. The gate to the pen was ajar. Elliot lay on his back, motionless, eyes open, surrounded by churned mud streaked with blood. His jeans were shredded. The fatal wound, a deep gash across the upper thigh, had pumped out enough blood to stain the soil black. Deputies and wildlife officers arrived minutes later after being called by the neighbor. They used poles and barriers to corner the cassowary, which paced and hissed as if still guarding its territory. Once sedated, they removed it from the enclosure and confirmed Elliot was dead at the scene. Paramedics noted catastrophic blood loss and multiple lacerations consistent with cassowary kicks. A medical examiner later confirmed femoral artery transection as the primary cause of death. His death was instant in biological terms. He bled out before he had a chance to crawl to the gate. Wildlife conservation authorities euthanized the cassowary the next morning. It wasn't out of vengeance, it was policy. Any animal that kills a human is considered too dangerous to keep. Elliot's forum community, almost 100 people, posted brief memorials calling him a passionate animal lover. The truth was simpler and less flattering. His property was cleared within a month. Elliot's family held a small funeral at a local church in Gainesville a week later. His daughter spoke briefly, describing his lifelong fascination with animals and how much time he spent caring for them. His remaining exotic birds were transferred to a licensed rehabilitation facility under wildlife authorities' supervision. The cassowary's dagger-like claws found its mark in Elliot's ignorance. Meanwhile, in Australia's Northern Territory, a camper would learn that saltwater crocodiles view splashing humans as nothing more than dinner delivered to its doorstep. It was September 7th, 2013, along the Mary River in Australia's Northern Territory. The air was thick with humidity and the constant buzz of insects, and the water moved slow and deceptively calm under the moonlight. To anyone familiar with the area, it was the kind of night that warned people to stay back from the riverbank. But to Declan Murren and his friends, it was just another stop on their long weekend camping trip, a night of laughter, cheap beer, and poor decisions that would end with one of them gone. Declan was 33, a refrigeration technician from Darwin. He was known among co-workers for being confident to the point of arrogance. He'd grown up near the coast, fishing in crocodile country, and liked to tell people he could read the water. He wasn't reckless by nature, but alcohol had a way of amplifying his need to prove a point. His friends described him as the one who always pushed things just a little too far, climbing higher, driving faster, testing limits just to see where they'd give. That weekend had been his idea. He'd gathered 6 friends for a 3-day trip at Cahill's Crossing on the Mary River, one of the most notorious crocodile habitats in the country. The men brought tents, coolers, and an old Bluetooth speaker. They ignored the large yellow warning signs near the bank that depicted a stylized crocodile silhouette. To them, it was just a symbol, something meant to scare tourists. They joked that locals exaggerated the danger to keep the best fishing spots to themselves. By late evening, several empty cans lay scattered around the fire pit, and Declan was in the middle of his 6th beer when he made the bet. The Mary River, wide and slow, cuts through floodplain country lined with pandanus and paperbark. At night, the surface reflects the stars like oil. Beneath that calm are some of the densest populations of saltwater crocodiles in the world, massive reptiles that can exceed 16 feet in length and weigh over 1,000 pounds. These predators ambush from below, relying on patience and stealth. Their jaws can exert over 3,000 pounds of pressure per square inch, and once they have hold of prey, escape is nearly impossible. Throughout the day, the group had seen multiple warnings. Locals passing in a ute had told them not to camp near the crossing. Earlier that evening, they'd spotted a floating log that turned out to have eyes. It submerged silently when someone pointed a flashlight at it. Declan brushed it off as just watching. Even when a bull croc slapped its tail upstream, sending ripples through the shallows, he laughed it off. It wasn't ignorance. He knew how dangerous they were, but years of hearing the same cautionary tales had dulled the threat into something abstract. He decided the river was only dangerous for the careless. Close to midnight, men gathered near the edge of the water, voices raised over the hiss of insects. They'd been drinking for hours, arguing over whether anyone actually swam in the river anymore. Someone joked that if Declan really wasn't afraid of crocodiles, he should prove it. Declan stripped off his shirt and walked toward the muddy slope, still grinning. The others half cheered, half protested. He stepped into the river barefoot, sinking into the silt. The water reached his knees, then his waist. He splashed once, sending arcs of water glittering under the moonlight, shouting that crocodiles were scared of people. For a few seconds, nothing happened, just the sound of water and laughter. Then the surface bulged 10 feet behind him. The crocodile's head rose almost soundlessly. Witnesses later described it as too fast to register. The animal closed the distance in less than a second. The first impact sounded like a gunshot as the jaws clamped over Declan's torso. His body folded, and the water exploded around them. He made one high, startled cry before being pulled under. The water churned, bubbles and thrashing visible in the beam of a flashlight. The others froze for a moment, too stunned to move. Then came a muffled yell, and the water went still again. For a few seconds, everyone stood in silence. Then one man ran forward, shouting Declan's name, but the river gave nothing back. One man grabbed a flashlight and swept it across the river. 2 glowing eyes reflected the beam 20 yards out, stationary, watching. A faint red stain spread from where Declan had gone under. Search teams arrived at dawn after one of them called for help. The men hadn't slept. They sat near the bank, hollow-eyed, their campsite littered with crushed beer cans and trampled grass. Police and rangers launched boats downstream. The Mary River current was slow but deceptive. The murky water hid everything beneath a thin green film. About a mile downriver, near a snag of branches, a ranger spotted a shape caught against a log. It was Declan's body, missing his left arm and and part of his lower torso. Police described the injuries as consistent with a large saltwater crocodile's feeding behavior. Not a single strike. Wildlife officers set a trap near the crossing that evening, a steel cage baited with meat. Within 2 days, they captured the crocodile, a massive animal with deep scars along its flanks. Parks and wildlife staff measured it at 13 feet 4 inches long and performed DNA tests on material recovered from the remains. The officers euthanized it, citing the risk to other visitors. Declan's funeral was held 4 days later at a small chapel near his parents' home. About 50 people came, mostly family and co-workers. His brother called it a stupid accident, saying Declan's stubborn streak had finally caught up with him. His mother kept the coffin closed and barred the media from entering. A police spokesperson later confirmed alcohol was a contributing factor and called the death preventable. The friends who'd been with him didn't speak publicly about it again. It was August 10th, 2025, when 5 college friends arrived at a remote treehouse rental deep in the wilderness of northern Montana. The isolated structure sat elevated 15 feet above ground on sturdy wooden posts, surrounded by dense pine forest and rugged terrain that stretched for miles without any sign of civilization. The nearest road lay 8 miles away through unmarked trails, making it the perfect location for what the group called their disconnected weekend retreat. Melissa Carrington, a 28-year-old environmental science graduate student, had organized the reunion trip for her college friends. Known for her confidence in wilderness settings and extensive hiking experience, Melissa believed her knowledge would keep the group safe in bear country. Her 4 companions were equally excited about the adventure, though none possessed her outdoor expertise. The treehouse had been marketed as an eco-friendly escape, where visitors could experience nature without modern distractions. The structure featured solar panels and composting toilets, but lacked any emergency communication systems or bear-proof storage containers. Recent drought conditions had driven wildlife closer to human structures, as animals searched desperately for food and water sources. Posted warnings throughout the area specifically mentioned increased bear activity, but the group dismissed these concerns as overly cautious Park Service propaganda. Their fatal mistake came immediately upon arrival, when they carelessly left coolers, food scraps, and garbage around the base of the treehouse structure, completely ignoring basic bear country protocols that Melissa should have known by heart. The scattered refuse created a powerful scent trail that would prove irresistible to hungry predators roaming the drought-stricken wilderness. Grizzly bears are among North America's most powerful predators, with adult males weighing up to 800 pounds and possessing incredible strength in their massive jaws and razor-sharp claws. These apex predators can run at speeds reaching 35 miles per hour and have an exceptional sense of smell that can detect food sources from miles away. When defending territory or food, grizzlies become extremely aggressive and will eliminate any perceived threat through overwhelming force. Their bite force exceeds 1,200 pounds per square inch, capable of crushing bones instantly. During late summer, bears enter hyperphagia, consuming up to 20,000 calories daily to prepare for winter hibernation. Saturday morning brought the massive male grizzly to their campsite. Drawn by the strong scent of improperly stored food, the bear immediately began destroying coolers and containers at the base of the structure, creating loud, crashing sounds that woke the sleeping group. Melissa descended the wooden ladder first to retrieve her expensive camera equipment from the ground level. The moment her feet touched earth, the grizzly charged with explosive speed. The bear's initial attack crushed Melissa's skull with a single powerful bite, killing her instantly as bone fragments penetrated her brain. Her second friend descended to help, but never reached the bottom, as the bear caught him at the ladder base, delivering a fatal bite that severed his carotid artery and crushed his cervical vertebrae. Blood sprayed across the wooden posts as his body went limp. The third victim attempted escape by climbing down the opposite side of the structure, but the intelligent predator had already circled the treehouse. The bear's massive claws raked across her chest, tearing through ribs and severing major arteries. She collapsed as blood poured from the gaping wounds, dying within seconds from massive hemorrhaging. The fourth friend jumped from the platform in desperation, but the bear pounced immediately upon impact. The grizzly's powerful jaws clamped down on his spine, producing an audible crack as vertebrae shattered. Paralysis was instantaneous, followed quickly by death from internal bleeding and spinal cord damage. The final victim remained in the treehouse, hoping the bear would leave. Instead, the determined predator returned and began violently shaking the support posts until the structure became unstable. When the terrified man finally fell, the bear was waiting below and delivered a crushing bite to his head, ending the massacre after 6 minutes of systematic killing. Local authorities discovered the scene 3 days later when the group failed to return as scheduled. The investigation revealed clear evidence of improper food storage and multiple bear safety violations. Wildlife officials confirmed this was the deadliest single bear attack in Montana's recorded history. Family members expressed shock that experienced outdoors woman Melissa had made such fundamental mistakes in bear country, leading to the deaths of 5 young people. The treehouse rental company immediately suspended operations and implemented new mandatory safety protocols for all future guests. State wildlife agencies used the tragedy to emphasize the critical importance of proper food storage in bear habitat areas throughout the region. The incident prompted nationwide discussions about wilderness safety education and the responsibilities of rental companies operating in dangerous wildlife territories across America. Melissa Carrington's story was a devastating reminder of how quickly a grizzly can turn deadly when safety protocols are ignored. For Kylie Bradshaw, it wasn't food that drew danger, but her camera that brought her too close to a mother bear's fury. It was September 15th, 2016, when professional wildlife photographer Kylie Bradshaw ventured deep into the remote valleys of Glacier National Park, Montana. The pristine wilderness stretched endlessly in all directions, with towering peaks casting long shadows over crystal-clear streams that carved through dense forests of pine and fir. This particular valley remained largely untouched by human presence, accessible only through grueling multi-day hikes that deterred casual visitors. The isolation made it perfect for Kylie's assignment. At 34 years old, Kylie had built a reputation as one of the most fearless wildlife photographers in North America. Her freelance work for National Geographic had taken her to some of the world's most dangerous locations, capturing intimate moments between predators and prey that few humans ever witnessed. Known for her willingness to take calculated risks, Kylie believed that extraordinary photographs required extraordinary proximity to her subjects. Her portfolio included close encounters with wolves, mountain lions, and various bear species across multiple continents. For 3 days, Kylie had been tracking a grizzly bear family through the valley, following fresh tracks and scat trails while maintaining what she considered a respectful distance. Park rangers had specifically warned visitors about an unusually aggressive mother bear with 2 cubs in the area, but Kylie dismissed these concerns as typical overcautious government rhetoric. Her assignment was to capture an intimate family portrait for a major magazine feature about maternal bonds in the wild. The substantial payment would fund her next expedition to Alaska. Her fatal mistake came from years of successful close encounters that had bred dangerous overconfidence. Despite park regulations requiring photographers to maintain at least 100 yards from bears, Kylie routinely worked within 50 yards of her subjects. On this particular morning, she spotted the bear family near a salmon-rich stream and decided to approach within 30 yards to capture what she called intimate family moments. Female grizzly bears with cubs represent one of nature's most dangerous combinations of power and protective instinct. These massive predators can weigh up to 400 pounds and possess incredible speed, capable of covering 50 yards in under 4 seconds when charging. Mother bears enter an extremely aggressive state when cubs are present, viewing any potential threat as requiring immediate and overwhelming response. Their maternal instincts override all other considerations, including self-preservation. making them unpredictably violent when humans venture too close. Kylie located the bear family at their preferred fishing spot, where the mother was teaching her 2 cubs to catch salmon in the shallow rapids. She crept closer through thick brush, using her telephoto lens to frame the perfect shot. The morning light filtered through the canopy, creating ideal photographic conditions. Kylie positioned herself downwind and began shooting, capturing dozens of images as the bears focused on fishing. The mother bear detected Kylie's human scent when the wind shifted unexpectedly. The massive predator immediately abandoned her fishing and charged directly toward the perceived threat to her cubs. Kylie had less than 4 seconds to react, as 400 pounds of muscle and fury closed the distance with terrifying speed. The initial impact knocked Kylie backward into the rocky stream bed, her expensive camera equipment scattering across the wet stones. The bear's first swipe caught Kylie across the abdomen, razor-sharp claws tearing through her hiking jacket and flesh beneath. The wounds opened her stomach cavity, exposing internal organs as blood began pouring from the gaping tears. The mother bear immediately followed with a devastating bite to Kylie's head. The grizzly's powerful jaws clamped down on her skull with crushing force, the temporal bone cracking audibly under pressure, exceeding 1,200 pounds per square inch. Bone fragments penetrated deep into brain tissue as the bear's canine teeth punctured through to the other side. Kylie's body went limp instantly as massive head trauma destroyed critical brain functions. The bear maintained her grip for several more seconds, shaking Kylie's lifeless form to ensure the threat was completely eliminated. Blood mixed with the clear stream water, creating crimson swirls that drifted downstream past the 2 cubs who had remained safely on the opposite bank. The entire attack lasted less than 45 seconds before the mother bear released her grip and returned to her cubs. She dragged Kylie's body approximately 100 yards from the stream, following instinctive behavior to remove potential threats from her cubs' vicinity. Death had occurred within the first 10 seconds from the combination of massive blood loss and catastrophic brain trauma. Park rangers discovered Kylie's remains 2 days later when she failed to check in at the scheduled time. The investigation revealed clear evidence that she had violated multiple park safety regulations by approaching far too close to the bear family. Her camera's memory card contained dozens of photographs taken from dangerously close range, documenting her final moments before the fatal encounter. Kylie's family expressed devastation at her death, but acknowledged that she had always known the risks of her chosen profession. The National Geographic assignment was posthumously dedicated to her memory, though the magazine implemented stricter safety protocols for future wildlife photography projects. Park officials used the incident to reinforce the critical importance of maintaining safe distances from all wildlife, particularly protective mothers with young. While Kylie Bradshaw's story demonstrated the deadly consequences of approaching protective mothers too closely, another tragedy was unfolding in Idaho, where a wounded predator's pain would transform Holly Mercer's routine hunting expedition into a deadly encounter. It was October 22, 2014, when experienced bow hunter Holly Mercer ventured into the dense forests of northern Idaho, pursuing what would become her final hunt. The remote wilderness area stretched for thousands of acres without roads or cell phone coverage, characterized by thick undergrowth, fallen logs, and towering pine trees that blocked most sunlight from reaching the forest floor. Early morning fog clung to the valleys, creating an eerie atmosphere that muffled sounds and limited visibility. Holly Mercer, at 31 years old, had established herself as one of the region's most skilled hunting guides, leading clients through some of Idaho's most challenging terrain for over a decade. Her reputation was built on an unwavering determination to track wounded game until recovery, a philosophy that had earned her respect among fellow hunters, but also bred a dangerous overconfidence in her abilities. Known for her stubborn refusal to abandon a blood trail, Holly believed that allowing wounded animals to escape was both unethical and unprofessional. That morning, Holly had successfully shot a large male black bear with her compound bow, from approximately 40 yards. The arrow struck the bear in the shoulder area, creating a painful but non-fatal wound that sent the animal fleeing into the thick forest. Fresh blood droplets on fallen leaves and disturbed vegetation created an obvious trail that Holly immediately began following. Her hunting partner had suggested waiting several hours before tracking, allowing the wounded bear time to weaken. But Holly dismissed this advice as unnecessarily cautious. Her fatal mistake was pursuing the wounded predator alone into dense cover without proper backup weapons. While Holly carried a hunting knife, she had left her rifle at base camp, relying solely on her bow for what she assumed would be a quick recovery mission. The arrow wound had created intense pain and rage in the bear, transforming it from a typically reclusive animal into an aggressive predator seeking to eliminate the source of its suffering. Black bears are deceptively powerful predators, with adult males weighing up to 400 pounds and possessing incredible strength in their muscular limbs and crushing jaws. Despite their smaller size compared to grizzlies, black bears are extremely agile climbers and can reach speeds of 30 miles per hour when charging. Wounded black bears become particularly dangerous as pain and fear override their natural tendency to avoid human contact. Their sharp claws can grow up to 4 inches long, while their bite force exceeds 800 pounds per square inch. Holly followed the blood trail for nearly 2 miles through increasingly dense undergrowth, carefully noting each droplet and disturbed branch that marked the bear's passage. The trail led deeper into a maze of fallen trees and thick brush that created perfect ambush conditions. Unknown to Holly, the wounded bear had circled back along its own trail, using its superior knowledge of the terrain to position itself for a defensive attack. The bear waited in a natural depression surrounded by dense thickets, where the blood trail appeared to end. As Holly approached the area, crouching low to examine the ground for additional sign, the wounded predator launched its attack from just 15 feet away. The bear's charge covered the distance in less than 2 seconds, giving Holly no time to nock an arrow or draw her knife. The initial impact knocked Holly backward into a tangle of fallen branches, her bow flying from her grasp as the bear's full weight crashed down upon her. The predator's first swipe caught Holly's right arm, razor-sharp claws tearing through her hunting jacket and deep into the muscle beneath. The wounds severed major arteries in her forearm, sending arterial blood spraying across the forest floor in rhythmic pulses. Holly managed to draw her hunting knife with her left hand and struck the bear twice in the shoulder area, but the shallow cuts only intensified the animal's rage. The bear responded by grabbing Holly's throat in its powerful jaws, applying crushing pressure that immediately collapsed her windpipe and fractured cervical vertebrae. The bite penetrated deep into neck tissue, severing the carotid artery and causing massive blood loss. Holly's body convulsed briefly as oxygen flow to her brain ceased, her limbs going limp as the bear maintained its death grip. The combination of blood loss from multiple arterial wounds and asphyxiation from the crushed windpipe caused death within 3 minutes of the initial attack. The bear held its grip for several additional minutes, ensuring the threat was completely eliminated. Holly's hunting partner discovered her remains the following morning when she failed to return to their agreed meeting point. The investigation revealed the complete sequence of events through blood evidence, disturbed vegetation, and Holly's own tracking notes. Wildlife officials confirmed that pursuing wounded, dangerous game alone violated basic hunting safety protocols. Holly's family expressed pride in her dedication to ethical hunting practices, while acknowledging that her stubborn determination had ultimately led to tragedy. The hunting community used her death as a cautionary tale about the importance of proper backup when tracking wounded predators. Holly Mercer's story demonstrated how wounded predators become exponentially more dangerous. For April Donnelly, it wasn't a wounded animal that posed the threat, but her campsite location that would turn night into terror. It was July 8th, 2017, when 26-year-old April Donnelly embarked on her first solo backpacking adventure through the remote backcountry of Yellowstone National Park, Wyoming. The pristine wilderness area she chose stretched across thousands of acres of untouched forest, characterized by dense pine groves, crystal-clear mountain streams, and rugged terrain that remained largely inaccessible to casual visitors. Her chosen campsite sat in a narrow valley where a fast-flowing creek carved through the landscape, creating a natural corridor that wildlife had used for centuries. April had recently graduated from college with a business degree and landed her dream job at a marketing firm in Denver. To celebrate this milestone and prove her independence, she decided to challenge herself with a 3-day solo hiking trip, despite having limited wilderness experience. Her outdoor adventures had previously consisted of day hikes on well-marked trails with friends, making this backcountry expedition a significant leap in difficulty and risk. Park rangers had issued recent warnings about increased bear activity throughout the area, specifically mentioning several aggressive encounters near water sources, where bears congregated during hot summer months. April had attended the mandatory bear safety briefing, but dismissed much of the information as overly cautious government regulations. She carried bear spray and a bear canister for food storage, believing these precautions would provide adequate protection. Her fatal mistake came when selecting her campsite location. Despite clear guidelines to camp at least 100 yards from water sources and established wildlife trails, April pitched her tent directly beside the creek in what appeared to be a perfect scenic location. The site sat on a well-worn path that showed obvious signs of regular animal use, including fresh tracks, scat, and worn vegetation. Large male grizzly bears are among North America's most formidable predators, with adults weighing up to 750 pounds and possessing incredible strength, capable of crushing bones with a single bite. These massive animals follow established travel routes through their territory, using the same paths for decades to move between feeding areas, water sources, and denning sites. During summer months, bears become increasingly active at night when temperatures cool, making them more likely to encounter campers positioned along these ancient highways. April had fallen asleep in her lightweight tent around 10 p.m., exhausted from her first day of hiking with a heavy pack. The large male grizzly approached her campsite at approximately 2 a.m., following his regular travel route along the creek toward a known fishing area downstream. The bear initially showed no aggressive intent, simply following his established path that happened to lead directly through April's poorly chosen campsite. The sound of the massive predator moving through the brush outside her tent woke April from deep sleep. Her movement inside the tent, combined with her human scent concentrated in the small space, triggered the bear's defensive response. The grizzly interpreted the tent as an unknown threat, blocking his familiar travel route, and immediately moved to eliminate the obstacle. The bear's powerful claws tore through the tent wall like paper, creating a gaping hole that exposed April to the massive predator looming above her. She attempted to scramble toward the tent's rear exit, but the bear's first swipe caught her across the chest before she could escape. The razor-sharp claws penetrated deep into her ribcage, breaking multiple ribs and puncturing her right lung. The bear immediately followed up by grabbing April's back in its powerful jaws as she tried to crawl away. The massive teeth penetrated through her spine between the shoulder blades, crushing vertebrae and severing her spinal cord. The bite created devastating internal injuries while simultaneously paralyzing her lower body, leaving her unable to flee or defend herself. April's screams of pain and terror only intensified the bear's aggressive response, as the sounds reinforced its perception of a threat requiring elimination. The grizzly began shaking her violently, its powerful neck muscles whipping her body back and forth like a rag doll. This violent shaking caused massive internal bleeding as damaged organs were torn further by the motion, while her broken ribs punctured additional internal structures. The bear maintained its grip for nearly 2 minutes, continuing to shake and bite until April's body went completely limp. Death resulted from a combination of massive blood loss, spinal cord damage, and internal organ failure caused by the crushing bite force and violent shaking. The entire attack lasted approximately 3 minutes from the initial tent breach until April's final breath. Park rangers discovered April's remains when she failed to check in at the scheduled time 3 days later. The investigation revealed clear evidence that she had camped directly on an established bear travel corridor, violating fundamental backcountry safety protocols. Her bear spray remained unused in her pack, suggesting the attack occurred too quickly for any defensive response. April's family expressed devastation at losing their daughter, but acknowledged that her inexperience in wilderness settings had contributed to the tragedy. The incident prompted park officials to implement stricter campsite approval processes for solo backpackers. April Donnelly's story highlighted how poor campsite selection can turn deadly. For Monica Hensel, it wasn't inexperience but scientific confidence that brought her too close to a feeding giant in Alaska. It was June 3, 2013, when 29-year-old wildlife biologist Monica Hensley arrived at a remote research station on the Alaska Peninsula, beginning what would become her final field study. The isolated facility sat perched on a bluff overlooking a pristine salmon stream that wound through dense coastal forest before emptying into the frigid waters of the North Pacific. The research station consisted of a small cabin, observation platforms, and basic equipment for studying bear behavior during salmon spawning season. Monica was pursuing her PhD in wildlife biology with a focus on coastal brown bear feeding patterns and territorial behavior. Her dissertation research required detailed observations of individual bears during peak salmon runs, documenting feeding strategies, social hierarchies, and maternal behaviors. Known for her methodical approach to scientific research, Monica believed that her extensive academic knowledge of bear behavior would protect her from the dangers that claimed less educated wilderness visitors. The research station had been established specifically for bear observation, with elevated platforms designed to provide safe viewing positions above the stream. However, Monica's research required close proximity behavioral documentation that pushed the boundaries of established safety protocols. She had received permits for extended solo research despite Park Service concerns about single-person operations in such remote bear habitat. Her fatal mistake was positioning herself downwind from feeding bears while taking detailed behavioral notes. Despite understanding wind direction's critical importance in bear encounters, Monica became so focused on documenting feeding behaviors that she failed to monitor changing weather conditions. On this particular morning, she had identified an unusually large male bear that had been dominating the prime fishing spots. Coastal brown bears represent some of the largest terrestrial predators on Earth, with adult males reaching weights of 900 pounds or more during peak salmon season. These massive animals possess incredible strength, capable of catching salmon with lightning-fast reflexes while maintaining perfect balance on slippery rocks. Their powerful jaws can crush bones effortlessly, while their razor-sharp claws provide deadly weapons for both fishing and defense. Monica had been observing the large male bear for over an hour as he systematically worked the most productive fishing pool in the stream. She positioned herself approximately 75 yards away on the opposite bank, using binoculars and a telephoto lens to document his techniques. The bear demonstrated remarkable fishing skills, catching salmon with powerful swipes of his massive paws. The wind had been blowing consistently from the bear toward Monica's position, carrying her scent away from the feeding predator. However, weather conditions shifted suddenly when a pressure system moved through the area, reversing the wind direction and carrying Monica's human scent directly toward the bear during his most intensive feeding period. The massive brown bear detected Monica's scent immediately and interpreted her presence as a direct threat to his valuable food source. He abandoned his fishing and charged directly toward her position with explosive speed that covered the 75-yard distance in less than 6 seconds. Monica attempted to retreat toward higher ground, but tripped over her research equipment, falling backward as the enormous predator closed the distance. The bear's initial bite crushed Monica's left shoulder blade and collarbone, the massive teeth penetrating deep into muscle and bone with devastating force. The impact knocked her flat against the rocky ground as blood began pouring from the puncture wounds. She attempted to reach for her bear spray, but the crushing damage to her shoulder made arm movement impossible. The brown bear immediately followed with a devastating bite to Monica's head, his powerful jaws clamping down on her skull with crushing force, exceeding 1,200 pounds per square inch. The massive canine teeth penetrated through the temporal bone, causing immediate and catastrophic brain trauma as bone fragments were driven deep into brain tissue. Monica's neck snapped when the bear began shaking her body with violent head movements, his powerful neck muscles whipping her lifeless form back and forth like prey. The cervical vertebrae separated completely, severing her spinal cord and causing instant death from massive neurological trauma. The entire attack lasted less than 15 seconds. Bush pilots discovered Monica's remains 3 days later when she failed to respond to scheduled radio check-ins. The investigation revealed that she had violated established safety distances while conducting her research, approaching far too close to actively feeding bears. Her detailed field notes provided clear evidence of the events leading to the fatal encounter. Monica's academic colleagues expressed shock at her death, noting that her extensive knowledge of bear behavior should have prevented such a tragic outcome. Her research data was incorporated into ongoing studies of human-bear interactions, serving as a cautionary example of how scientific confidence can lead to dangerous overconfidence. Monica Hensel's story demonstrated how even scientific expertise cannot overcome the fundamental dangers of approaching feeding predators. If these bear encounters shocked you, click the video on your screen right now to see even more deadly wildlife attacks that prove why respecting nature's most dangerous predators can mean the difference between life and death. It was a crisp September morning in 2016. The Alaskan wilderness of Wrangell St. Elias National Park shrouded in pre-dawn mist. At 5:37 a.m., a tripwire alarm shattered the silence with 3 sharp metallic clinks. Within 7 minutes, 5 law enforcement officers would be dead, victims of one of nature's most perfect killing machines. The Special Response Unit had hiked 16 miles into the backcountry, tracking illegal poaching activity. They were following whoever had killed and partially buried a Kodiak bear, leaving bait piles to attract more victims. Fresh boot prints and spent rifle casings told them they were close. But there was something else in those tracks. The massive paw prints of a grizzly sow, broad and deep, still active in the area. The team represented diverse backgrounds. Sergeant Robert Kirsch, 45, was the most experienced, methodical, and measured. T.J. Rell, 36, was a former smoke jumper with an aggressive approach to danger. Dennis Ngo, 32, came from animal control and followed protocols religiously. Janai Myers, 29, had a biology background, but this was her first deep backcountry deployment. Cal Hollis, 40, was disciplined and devout, on only his second field assignment. With them was a civilian observer, Eric Layton, 39, a Park Service fire planner tasked with mapping seasonal burn zones. Layton wasn't armed and had no enforcement role. He was tagging along to coordinate future drone surveys over known poaching routes. He slept slightly away from the others, inside a blue tarp shelter strung between 2 trees. By his own later admission, he never heard the safety briefings. He was just there to observe and document. They established camp 200 yards from the bait site and set tripwire alarms. Only 1 heavy rifle had made it in with the initial gear drop. The rest of the team carried service sidearms and flares. A second shipment of long guns was delayed due to air transport restrictions and poor weather, standard complications in remote operations. It wasn't ideal, but the team had pushed forward, believing the bear that left the tracks had already moved on. That decision would prove catastrophically wrong. At 5:37 a.m., an alarm clinked from the northwest perimeter. Hollis, closest to the edge, moved to investigate. From his shelter, Leighton heard him call softly. Then a high, sharp scream that cut off mid-breath. Rel charged toward the sound without waiting. Leighton, now fully alert, unzipped the front flap of his tent and watched through the mesh. He saw Rel vanish between the trees. Then, out of nowhere, it came. Grizzly bears' massive paws are equipped with claws up to 4 inches long, capable of disemboweling prey with a single swipe. Their bite force of over 1,200 pounds per square inch is enough to crush a bowling ball. When wounded or protecting a food source, these apex predators become exponentially more dangerous. The bear's forepaw struck Rel with devastating force, launching him sideways into a fir trunk with an audible crack. As his body crumpled, the grizzly clamped its jaws around his shoulder and began dragging him toward the underbrush. Ngo fired a flare, briefly illuminating the carnage in hellish red light. Myers screamed. Kirsch shouldered the .375 rifle and fired twice, both rounds missing as the bear twisted behind cover. Using terrain instinctively, the bear circled behind them. Grizzlies are known for using cover surprisingly well, even in thick brush. Myers had barely begun her radio transmission when the bear struck her from behind. Kirsch spun, raised the rifle again, and this time found his mark, a neck shot that sprayed blood against the trees. Leighton watched as it stood and turned, but the wounded bear didn't fall. Instead, it became even more dangerous, pain and rage driving it to new levels of aggression. Ngo, attempting to reach higher ground, turned to flee. The grizzly lunged with predatory precision, catching him by the legs and dragging him down. The mauling was brutal and efficient, deep, crushing blows that shattered ribs through his protective vest. His scream was cut short when the bear's jaws closed around his lower jaw, silencing him forever. Kirsch, now alone and facing a wounded apex predator, backed toward their equipment ATV. He kept the rifle raised, but the rifle's bolt was bent, likely from impact during the chaos, rendering it useless. The bear was gone again, but Leighton knew it wasn't over. He ducked low but didn't look away. Kirsch never saw it. The bear struck him from behind, slammed him against the ATV rack, and opened his throat in one clean motion. Then it stood over the body and sniffed the air. Leighton froze. His tent flap still hung open. He said the bear turned toward him once, ears high. It sniffed, then limped back toward the bait site, trailing blood. From the first alarm to the final death, the entire massacre lasted under 7 minutes. Under his tarp, 20 feet from the nearest tent, Eric Leighton had gone silent. He later told investigators he heard everything. The screams, the snaps of breaking branches, the radio static. When the flare lit up the trees, he saw the bear's silhouette once. Then he buried his head and stayed frozen under a pile of gear. Experts later said the bear likely ignored Leighton because he neither moved nor posed a threat, and its aggression had been tied to active stimuli: motion, sound, and proximity to the bait. 2 civilian rangers arrived at 8:12 a.m. by ATV for scheduled pickup. They found shredded tents, a mangled radio still transmitting static, blood trails, drag marks. The .375 rifle was jammed, its bolt bent and useless. Claw marks scarred the tree trunks chest high. Under the tarp, they found Leighton, pale, shaking, still clutching his field notebook. They followed a blood trail east toward the bait site. There, lying partially collapsed among a churned mess of moss and dirt, was the bear. The neck wound had finally bled out. The bear had died less than an hour after the final shot. Experts later said that it was likely food-conditioned and was defending a high-value bait site, reacting with territorial aggression heightened by injury and prolonged human scent intrusion. No official photos were released. The public report cited only a fatal wildlife engagement under review. Leighton was not interviewed by the media and later transferred to administrative duty in Anchorage. Funerals were held quietly. Myers' family refused all press. Hollis was buried in Palmer. Rel's ashes were scattered in Denali. Ngo's parents requested no service. Kirsch received no posthumous commendation. The bait site was never tied to any suspect. Casings were untraceable, and trail cams were wiped. This group had rifles and training, but it still wasn't enough. Meanwhile, just one state over, a man with only a whistle walked straight into the path of another grizzly and never came back. It was August 17th, 2015. The Montana wilderness lay still under the dry weight of late summer, heat radiating off the slopes of Gallatin National Forest. Somewhere north of Thompson Ridge, James "Jimmy" Crawl walked alone into the trees with a camera slung across his chest and a sandwich wrapped in foil. By evening, what search crews would find of him had to be lifted out in 2 separate bags. Jimmy was a 34-year-old seasonal trail crew worker in his 4th summer with the Forest Service. Originally from Missoula, he spent winters fixing chainsaws and outboard motors at a small repair garage. He was quiet, carried a compass instead of GPS, and preferred solitude to camp chatter. On rest days, he often disappeared alone with his camera and a single bottle of water, returning with photos of elk and moose he never bothered naming aloud. Years earlier, Jimmy had discovered a hidden spring while scouting game trails. It wasn't on any map, just a trickle of cold water between rocks near a narrow ridge cut. He claimed the elk liked it there, returning often to photograph wildlife in the secluded spot. That morning, while others played cards at base camp, he packed a sandwich, filled his canteen, and strapped his camera to his chest. Forest Service alerts had warned of increased bear activity due to an unusually dry season, pushing wildlife closer to human trails in search of food. Earlier that week, a black bear had been spotted near camp dumpsters. Jimmy had dismissed it as not the dangerous kind. He carried a bear whistle on a lanyard, but refused bear spray, claiming bears smell it coming anyway. His belief that silence was more respectful in wild places would prove fatal. Grizzlies in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem can weigh 1,000 pounds, sprint at 35 miles per hour, and smell carrion from miles away. Their 4-inch claws can tear through bone, and surprise encounters near food caches often trigger violent, instinctive attacks. By early afternoon, Jimmy moved beyond maintained paths into steep terrain, stepping over windfall and pushing through saplings. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, and the air smelled of ripened chokecherries and damp earth. As he neared the ridge, he paused to photograph elk antlers lodged in brush. He passed torn-up logs and fresh claw marks on a lodgepole pine, warning signs he either didn't notice or chose to ignore. Roughly 300 yards away, hikers Aaron and Mark DeWitt of Spokane had stopped to rest along a narrow trail with a clear overlook of the slope Jimmy was crossing. They spotted movement through the trees. First Jimmy's red flannel shirt, then something low and brown following through the brush. Mark raised his binoculars. The attack happened fast. The grizzly emerged behind a downed log and charged without sound. Jimmy had just raised his camera when the bear collided with him, knocking him flat. Aaron screamed. Mark shouted and began sprinting down the slope. From their position, they saw the grizzly rake Jimmy's torso with its claws, then clamp its jaws onto his shoulder and shake violently. Jimmy thrashed for seconds before going limp. Like many fatal maulings, the bear seemed to target Jimmy's head, ripping upward from the jawline in what experts call a predatory finishing behavior. By the time Mark reached him, the bear had dragged Jimmy partway into the brush, swatting at his backpack and huffing. Mark screamed, waving his arms. The bear rose up, taller than any human, and stared for 3 long seconds before dropping to all fours and thundering into the forest. Aaron arrived moments later, shaking, radioing for help. Jimmy was still alive. His chest had been opened down to the ribcage. His jaw hung broken, teeth shattered. He couldn't speak, but his eyes were wide and locked onto Mark's. Mark, a former combat medic, packed gauze into the wounds and tried to slow the bleeding, but Jimmy's breathing grew shallow. He died less than 10 minutes later. Their emergency radio pinged a ranger station 12 miles south, where fire crews happened to be staging. A medevac team was airborne within 90 minutes. Rangers reported a strong smell of decaying meat in the area and believed the bear had been guarding a cached elk carcass hidden nearby. No cache was located, but signs of bear traffic were heavy. The area was closed indefinitely. Jimmy's funeral was held quietly in Missoula 5 days later, attended by family, co-workers, and a few Forest Service officials. No speeches were made, and his closed casket was draped with a wool blanket instead of a flag, as he had requested years earlier. Yet even as the Montana wilderness claimed another person who ventured too far from marked paths, thousands of miles away, a high school teacher, walking a trail she'd known for years, would learn too late that not all bears bluff, especially not when food is scarce. It was May 2nd, 2013, the late-day sunlight filtering through the hardwood canopy of the Great Smoky Mountains, as Claire Densmore adjusted her camera settings one final time. The 42-year-old art teacher from Maryville had no way of knowing that in less than 5 minutes, she would become another statistic in nature's unforgiving, deadly surprises. Claire was an experienced hiker who had walked these trails for over 2 decades. Her colleagues often joked that she could identify every wildflower in the Smokies and navigate the backcountry with her eyes closed. Her scratched DSLR camera had captured thousands of images across these mountains, each one a testament to her deep connection with the natural world. This spring weekend trip with her girlfriend Sandy Lou and 15-year-old son Jonah was meant to be a peaceful reset, a chance to photograph early wildflowers and share her love of the outdoors with the people she cared about most. That afternoon, Claire and Sandy had left Jonah at their backcountry campsite to rest his sore ankle while they explored a narrow ridge trail. Claire moved ahead, drawn by a cluster of blooming trillium that would make perfect subjects for her photography. However, trail advisories had been posted that spring after a black bear had bluff-charged a solo hiker near Gregory Ridge. Though smaller than grizzlies, black bears in the Smokies can weigh up to 500 pounds and break a human's neck with one swipe. Their curved claws inflict deep wounds, and when startled or defending territory, they can attack with sudden, lethal force. Rangers had also mentioned recent bear bedding signs found in dense mountain laurel on the southern slope near Abrams Creek. But Claire, confident in her experience and familiarity with these trails, had dismissed the warnings with characteristic optimism. She carried no bear spray, relying instead on a whistle and her knowledge of bear behavior to keep her safe. At approximately 5:03 p.m., Sandy heard a sharp crash from down the ridge, followed by Claire's voice, something shouted but garbled by distance and terrain. Then came a sound that made her blood run cold. Sandy ran toward the sound, expecting to find Claire injured from a fall. Instead, at the edge of the ravine, she witnessed a scene that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Claire was down the slope, partially obscured by underbrush, with a large black bear standing over her. The animal had emerged from a stand of mountain laurel, where it had likely been resting, and struck Claire broadside with devastating force. She had landed hard against a downed log, one arm raised defensively as the bear's claws tore through her jacket and into the flesh of her shoulder. The bear's massive jaws clamped down on her upper left arm, shaking its head violently. Sandy screamed and threw her water bottle, then grabbed a thick branch and hurled it down the slope. The bear paused momentarily, raising its head and standing upright to assess this new threat. Its broad shoulders and spring-thickened fur made it appear even more massive and intimidating. But instead of retreating, the bear dropped back down and seized Claire by the torso, dragging her sideways into deeper cover where the dense ferns and underbrush swallowed them both. Claire's screams echoed through the forest before being abruptly silenced. Sandy scrambled partway down the slope, but couldn't penetrate the dense brush. Her hands trembling, she activated the GPS distress beacon clipped to her belt, the small device that would summon help that would arrive too late. By 6:47 p.m., 2 backcountry rangers arrived with rifles and first aid equipment. They found Claire's body 30 yards downhill, partially concealed by vegetation. Her torso and neck had sustained massive trauma, deep puncture wounds, and lacerations that told the story of a brief but devastating encounter with one of nature's most efficient killers. The investigation revealed no obvious trigger for the attack. No food, no scented items, no evidence of cubs in the area. Rangers concluded that Claire had likely startled the bear from its resting place in the mountain laurel thicket, triggering a defensive response that escalated into a fatal mauling. It was a reminder that even experienced outdoors enthusiasts can fall victim to the unpredictable nature of wild animals. Claire's funeral was held 4 days later in Maryville, with Sandy, students, fellow teachers, and family filling the small community center auditorium. Her closed casket sat beneath a projection of her final photographs: wildflowers, trail bridges, and mist-covered ridgelines. Park officials closed the surrounding trails for 2 weeks and installed additional signage warning of recent bear activity. The bear was not located, and wildlife authorities decided against a search or kill order, determining the attack to be a rare but natural defensive incident. Tennessee mountains proved that familiar trails can turn deadly without warning. Similarly, in the Arctic, a young researcher would learn that the world's largest land predator shows no mercy to those who venture into its territory. It was July 10, 2018. The Arctic sun hung low over the ice near Resolute Bay as Gary Holtz, a 28-year-old graduate research assistant from Ottawa, set out to deploy one last camera. He was focused on completing his fieldwork before weather conditions worsened. He didn't know he was walking into the territory of the Arctic's most efficient land predator. Gary was a promising young researcher working on his master's thesis in Arctic ecology, focusing on fox migration patterns across the unforgiving landscape of permafrost and sea ice. His colleagues described him as brilliant in the lab, but inexperienced in the field, a dangerous combination in one of Earth's most hostile environments. This was his first season north of the tree line, and his enthusiasm to prove himself would ultimately override the caution that keeps researchers alive in polar bear country. What Gary likely didn't fully comprehend was the lethal efficiency of the predator that called this frozen wilderness home. Polar bears are the largest land carnivores, with males weighing up to 1,500 pounds and standing over 10 feet tall. They can sprint at 25 miles per hour, detect prey from over a mile away, and kill with a single swipe of their 4-inch claws. And most terrifyingly, unlike other bear species, polar bears actively hunt humans, viewing them as potential prey rather than threats to be avoided. That morning, Gary had been working with a wildlife logistics team near the edge of shifting sea ice, deploying GPS tracking equipment and remote cameras to monitor Arctic fox populations. A local Inuit guide, experienced in polar bear safety and armed with flares and a rifle, had been assigned to accompany him during all field operations. Recent bear activity in the area, fresh scat, tracks, and multiple sightings had prompted strict safety protocols. The rule was absolute: never separate from the guide, regardless of circumstances. The warning signs were there from the beginning. The guide had expressed concern about increasing winds from the west, conditions that could fracture and drift the ice floes unpredictably. When Gary insisted they had enough time to reach the final burrow cluster, the guide agreed reluctantly, emphasizing they needed to move quickly and stay together. But Gary's academic ambition and desire to complete his research objectives would prove stronger than his survival instincts. Around 12:45 p.m., they made the deadly decision to split up. Gary moved east on foot with the final camera unit while the guide checked an older marker nearby. Despite his usual caution, the guide hesitated, but gave in. Visibility was good, and they'd been out for hours with no new tracks. It felt like a calculated risk. At 1:04 p.m., the guide heard the sharp crack of a gunshot echoing across the ice, followed by desperate shouts. He turned to see Gary running frantically across the treacherous surface, rifle in one hand, pack slung open and spilling equipment. Behind him, moving with terrifying purpose, was a massive male polar bear, likely over 900 pounds. Gary's inexperience with Arctic conditions became immediately apparent as his boots slipped on the melting ice crust. He staggered at the edge of a narrow lead, a dangerous split in the ice, and lost his footing completely. The rifle clattered away across the frozen surface as he hit the slush, leaving him defenseless against one of nature's most efficient killers. The bear reached him within seconds, moving with the silent efficiency that has made polar bears the undisputed rulers of the Arctic. It clamped its massive jaws around Gary's shoulder, the crushing force of its bite instantly breaking bones and tearing through muscle and tissue. The bear then dragged Gary's body 30 feet toward an outcrop of piled ice and snow, a behavior consistent with polar bears securing their prey before consumption. The guide fired a flare, the bright burst of light causing the bear to flinch momentarily, but not release its grip on Gary's motionless form. A second flare was launched as the guide shouted and advanced slowly, following protocols designed to drive off aggressive bears. The massive predator paused, assessed this new threat, then retreated behind a wind-carved ridge, disappearing into the Arctic landscape as suddenly as it had appeared. The guide immediately called for a rescue team, which arrived within an hour, but it was far too late. Rangers found the attack site streaked with blood and drag marks, bits of clothing and equipment embedded in the slush. Gary's body lay partially concealed behind the ice ridge, his parka torn open to reveal the devastating injuries inflicted by the bear's claws and teeth. The investigation revealed that Gary had fired only one shot, likely in panic as the bear closed the distance between them. There was no evidence of food conditioning or provocation. The bear had simply acted on its predatory instincts, viewing the isolated human as an opportunity for an easy meal. The research operation was immediately shut down, equipment hastily packed and airlifted out with military assistance. Gary's remains were flown to Ottawa under quiet escort, his death handled with the bureaucratic discretion that often surrounds such tragedies in remote locations. Parks Canada reviewed the incident and revised their polar bear safety protocols, adding an absolute prohibition against researchers separating from their assigned guides under any circumstances. The Arctic ice claimed another researcher who ignored his guide's warnings about separation. And halfway around the world, in the peaks of the Himalayas, a solitary photographer would discover that abandoned monastery ruins offer no sanctuary when an Asiatic black bear corners its prey on a crumbling cliff ledge. It was October 1st, 2014. In the damp hills of western Sikkim, freelance photographer Ravi Malhotra set out before sunrise, hoping to capture the morning light from a ridge above camp. The 44-year-old freelance photographer from Kolkata had no way of knowing that his quest to capture the perfect sunrise would lead him into a deadly encounter with one of the Himalayas' most formidable predators. Ravi was a solitary artist who had spent 2 decades documenting India's vanishing landscapes, crumbling temples, forgotten footpaths, and lost village rituals that existed only in the memories of elders. His colleagues knew him as reclusive, a man who preferred the company of shadows and stone to human conversation. He traveled light, carried a beaten camera loaded with film, and rarely bothered with the safety protocols that kept other photographers alive in remote locations. That late September, Ravi had embarked on a solo journey to photograph remote Buddhist shrine ruins near Tashiding, drawn by stories of a partially collapsed monastery he'd heard about from a tea seller the previous spring. Local villagers had warned him about increased bear activity in the area, animals coming down from higher elevations to strip walnut trees and scavenge near abandoned structures. But Ravi, like so many before him, dismissed these warnings as local superstition rather than the life-saving advice they were meant to be. He had pitched his small tent inside the roofless stone ruin 2 days before the attack, hoping to capture the perfect sunrise over the Rangit Valley. The location he chose sat below a narrow ledge that curved around a steep, brush-covered slope, where rhododendron, bamboo, and Himalayan oak grew thick enough to conceal potential predators. On the morning of October 1st, Ravi likely ventured out early to scout camera angles for the dawn light, moving along the treacherous ledge trail above his camp. What he didn't know, or chose to ignore, was that Asiatic black bears often bed down in exactly these types of dense thickets during early morning hours, particularly during the pre-winter feeding season, when they become territorial and aggressive toward any perceived threats. Adult males can weigh up to 400 pounds, with 3-inch claws that can tear flesh in a single swipe. At 5:18 a.m., a trekking group from Gangtok heard the frantic barking of their pack dogs echoing up the ridge, followed by a man's voice, panicked and desperate, before being abruptly cut off. 2 local porters, walking ahead of the main group, moved cautiously toward the sound of distress. From a quarter-mile distance, they witnessed a haunting scene. Ravi was clinging desperately to the lower edge of a rock face, an instinctive but futile move. Asiatic black bears, with claws made for climbing, followed with ease. The bear struck downward, its razor-sharp claws slashing at Ravi's legs until he lost his grip and plummeted onto the rocky trail below. He tried desperately to crawl toward a rock shelf that might provide shelter, but the bear dropped after him. Unlike the quick kills favored by some predators, the bear mauled Ravi for nearly 2 minutes, its claws tearing through flesh and muscle while its powerful jaws crushed bone. The porters, still too far away and completely unarmed, could only watch in horror as the bear systematically destroyed its human prey. When the bear finally vanished uphill into the rhododendron scrub, it left behind a scene of carnage. Ravi lay unconscious on the trail, bleeding from massive head and neck wounds, with deep lacerations covering his arms and legs. The porters reached him within minutes, but the damage was already catastrophic. With no cell service and terrain too difficult for rapid evacuation, it took over 3 hours to reach a trailhead where a vehicle could meet them. The rural clinic nurse who examined Ravi's broken body declared his injuries incompatible with transport survival. A clinical way of saying that the bear had inflicted wounds no human could survive. Per his family's wishes, Ravi's body was cremated in Sikkim, close to where he had died pursuing his art. His ashes were flown back to Kolkata, where a small circle of friends and colleagues mourned the loss of a talented photographer whose final expedition had ended in tragedy. The trekking company whose porters witnessed the attack added laminated handouts warning guests about bear activity and the dangers of leaving marked trails at dawn. It was October 14th, 2016, and the remote cabin of Harold Hal Bergstrom sat nestled deep in the Montana wilderness, just 15 miles from the eastern boundary of Glacier National Park. The rustic log structure, surrounded by towering pines and golden aspens touched by early autumn frost, had been Harold's sanctuary for 8 years since his beloved wife Margaret lost her battle with cancer. At 60, the retired forest ranger had chosen complete isolation over the painful memories of their suburban home, finding solace in the same wilderness he had protected for over 3 decades. Harold's weathered hands moved methodically as he split firewood behind his cabin, the rhythmic thud of his axe echoing across the silent valley. The first significant snowfall of the season had arrived unexpectedly, blanketing the surrounding peaks in pristine white and signaling the approach of a harsh Montana winter. The cabin itself reflected Harold's stubborn independence and disdain for what he considered unnecessary precautions. Unlike neighboring properties, his home lacked proper bear-proofing measures. No reinforced doors, no bear-resistant garbage containers, and no electric fencing. Harold viewed such precautions as signs of weakness, believing his knowledge of animal behavior made him immune to the dangers that threatened ordinary people. That afternoon, Harold had been smoking salmon in his kitchen, the rich aroma filling his home as he prepared his winter protein stores. The scent drifted through the mountain air, carried by shifting winds across miles of wilderness, where one of nature's most powerful predators was beginning his final preparations for winter hibernation. Grizzly bears are among North America's most formidable predators, with adult males weighing between 600 and 800 pounds and possessing the strength to overturn automobiles. These massive omnivores can run up to 35 miles per hour despite their bulk, and their sense of smell is 7 times more powerful than a bloodhound's, allowing them to detect food sources from miles away. During late fall, grizzlies enter a state called hyperphagia, consuming up to 20,000 calories per day to build fat reserves for winter hibernation. As evening approached, Harold propped open his back door to create a cross breeze while he carried armloads of split wood into his cabin. What Harold didn't realize was that a massive 800-pound male grizzly had been following the salmon scent for over 2 miles, drawn by the promise of an easy meal. On his final trip inside, he headed to the kitchen to brew coffee, completely unaware that the enormous grizzly had approached his property and was now investigating the tantalizing smells emanating from his open door. Harold discovered the intruder when he returned to his living room and found the 800-pound grizzly systematically destroying his kitchen. Cabinets hung open, their contents scattered across the floor, while the bear's powerful claws had shredded packages and containers in his search for food. Harold's military training kicked in as he assessed the situation, but his decades of experience with smaller black bears led him to make a fatal miscalculation. He began banging metal pots together and shouting at the top of his lungs, tactics that had successfully driven away black bears in the past. The massive bear lifted his head from the refrigerator and fixed his small, dark eyes on Harold. Instead of retreating, the grizzly's body language shifted to pure aggression. His ears flattened against his skull, his massive shoulders hunched forward, and his lips pulled back to reveal 4-inch canine teeth designed for crushing bone. Harold realized his mistake and moved toward the wall-mounted rifle rack where his .3006 hunting rifle waited. But the narrow hallway that had seemed cozy during 8 years of solitary living now became a death trap. The bear crossed the room with shocking speed, closing the distance before Harold could properly shoulder the rifle. The impact drove him backward into the living room, the force slamming his back against the floor and knocking the weapon from his grip. His ribs gave under the bear's weight with a wet crack as a massive paw pressed down through his chest. The bear's jaws dropped onto the side of his skull in a single, powerful bite, enough force to cause immediate neurological collapse. What followed was mechanical and focused. The bear raked its claws through Harold's torso with the same single-minded drive it had shown when it tore through the kitchen, responding to movement only long enough to remove it from its path to food. The animal's behavior remained consistent with a food-conditioned intrusion, not active predatory hunting. Harold's body was discovered 3 days later when his neighbor, rancher Bill Morrison, arrived to check on him after noticing that Harold hadn't picked up his mail. Wildlife officials tracked the bear for 2 days, eventually tranquilizing it near a creek bed 5 miles from the cabin. Due to the confirmed fatal attack, the animal was euthanized on site in accordance with state wildlife policy. Harold's death prompted new discussions about bear-proofing requirements for remote properties. But Harold wasn't the only person whose expertise failed them when facing a grizzly bear. In Alaska, a nature photographer's pursuit of the perfect shot would lead to a deadly encounter with a protective mother and her cubs. It was June 7, 2015, and the pristine wilderness of Katmai National Park in Alaska buzzed with the activity of peak salmon season. The Brooks River, famous for its spectacular brown bear viewing opportunities, attracted photographers and tourists from around the world who came to witness one of nature's most impressive displays. Elena Vasquez had positioned herself along the riverbank at dawn, her professional camera equipment spread across a waterproof tarp as she prepared for what she hoped would be a career-defining photography session. At 34, Elena was a freelance nature photographer from Anchorage who had been struggling to establish herself in the competitive world of wildlife photography. Her recent divorce had left her financially strained and desperate to capture award-winning images that could launch her career to the next level. She had been photographing bears for 3 years, gradually building a portfolio that showed promise but lacked the dramatic impact needed to attract major magazine contracts. Elena's confidence in reading bear behavior had grown with each successful photo session, leading her to take increasingly bold risks in pursuit of unique shots. This confidence, combined with financial pressure and artistic ambition, would prove to be a deadly combination. Coastal brown bears are among the world's largest terrestrial predators, with adult females weighing between 400 and 600 pounds. During salmon season, these massive omnivores gather at prime fishing locations where they can consume up to 30 salmon per day, building crucial fat reserves for winter hibernation. Mother bears with cubs are particularly dangerous during this time, as they must protect their offspring while competing with larger males for the best fishing spots. Their protective instincts are heightened to extreme levels, and they will attack any perceived threat to their cubs without warning. That morning, Elena had been photographing a mother bear with 2 yearling cubs as they fished in the shallow rapids. The 600-pound sow was an experienced fisher, teaching her cubs the techniques they would need to survive on their own. Elena had initially kept the required 50-yard distance set by park regulations for brown bear viewing, but as the light shifted and the scene grew more photogenic, she began creeping closer, eventually closing the gap to just 30 yards. Her financial desperation overrode her safety training as she moved steadily closer to the fishing bears. The mother bear had been displaying increasingly agitated body language as Elena approached, but the photographer was so focused on her camera's viewfinder that she missed the warning signs. Elena continued her approach until she was within 30 yards of the bear family, far closer than park regulations allowed, and well within the mother bear's critical defense zone. The sow's response was immediate and purely defensive. Like most brown bear encounters involving cubs, the objective was to neutralize a perceived threat as quickly as possible rather than to hunt or feed. The 600-pound mother bear charged with explosive speed, covering the 30 yards between them in less than 3 seconds. Elena looked up from her viewfinder just in time to see 600 pounds of muscle moving with single-purpose efficiency, bearing down on her. She tried to run, but immediately tripped over her scattered camera equipment, falling face-first onto the rocky riverbank. The mother bear's massive paws struck Elena's back with enough force to fracture bone, driving her into the rocky ground while her claws raked across her torso. The bear's jaws clamped down on Elena's head and neck, her 4-inch canines puncturing through skull bone and severing major arteries. The protective mother focused contact on the head and torso, using her weight to pin her, while the jaws worked with mechanical precision. The entire strike sequence lasted less than a minute before the sow immediately guided her cubs away from the area. Other photographers witnessed the incident from the required safe distance, but could only call for help and document the consequences of violating distance protocols. Elena died from massive trauma before park rangers could arrive at the remote location. The mother bear and her cubs were monitored but not relocated, as the attack had occurred due to human error in violating established safety protocols. Elena's death became a cautionary tale about the dangers of prioritizing artistic vision over personal safety in wildlife photography. The investigation revealed that Elena had been warned multiple times by park rangers about maintaining proper distances from bears, but financial pressure and artistic ambition had driven her to take increasingly dangerous risks. Her death prompted renewed emphasis on safety education for wildlife photographers and stricter enforcement of distance regulations in national parks. But even experienced professionals weren't immune to deadly encounters with grizzly bears. In Seattle, a zookeeper's routine morning would turn into a nightmare when a mechanical failure trapped him with 700 pounds of apex predator. It was March 22nd, 2017, and the privately operated wildlife facility on the outskirts of Seattle was beginning another busy day of animal care and public education. The morning air was crisp and filled with the sounds of awakening animals as staff members arrived to begin their daily routines. Marcus Thompson, a 29-year-old zookeeper with 6 years of experience working with large mammals, was preparing for what should have been a routine feeding session with Kodiak, the facility's 700-pound male grizzly bear. Marcus had built his reputation on strict adherence to safety protocols and his calm, methodical approach to working with dangerous animals. His colleagues respected his expertise and steady demeanor, qualities that had earned him a promotion track toward becoming head of the carnivore department. Marcus was engaged to Sarah, a fellow zookeeper who worked with the facility's primate collection, and they were planning their wedding for the following spring. The grizzly exhibit at the wildlife facility was well maintained, featuring multiple holding areas, automated door systems, and safety measures designed to prevent exactly the kind of accident that was about to occur. Marcus had worked with Kodiak for over 2 years and had developed what he believed was a professional understanding of the massive bear's behavior patterns and temperament. Kodiak was a rescued bear who had been brought to the facility as an orphaned cub after his mother was killed by poachers in Alaska. Now fully grown at 700 pounds, he was an impressive specimen who served as an ambassador for his species while living in comfortable captivity. Grizzly bears in captivity retain all their natural behaviors and instincts, including powerful territorial drives and defensive responses to perceived threats. Even bears raised from cubs can become extremely dangerous when startled or when they feel their territory is being invaded. Their incredible strength, speed, and predatory instincts make them among the most dangerous animals in any zoological collection, requiring constant vigilance and multiple safety systems to prevent accidents. That morning, Marcus followed his established routine of checking the automated systems that controlled access between Kodiak's outdoor exhibit and his indoor holding areas. The computer display showed that Kodiak was secured in his holding area, allowing Marcus safe access to the main exhibit for cleaning and food preparation. What Marcus didn't know was that a mechanical failure in the door system had allowed Kodiak to return to the main exhibit without triggering the safety alerts. Marcus entered the exhibit carrying fresh hay and Kodiak's morning meal, completely unaware that the massive bear was present in the enclosure. Marcus began spreading hay near the feeding area, his back turned to the rock formation where Kodiak was resting. Kodiak appeared silently from behind the large rocks, his massive frame moving with surprising stealth across the exhibit floor. Marcus turned around to find himself face to face with 700 pounds of apex predator in an enclosed space with no escape route. Kodiak charged with devastating force, his massive body covering the distance between them in seconds. Marcus tried to use a wheelbarrow as a barrier, but the bear's 700-pound frame smashed through the obstacle like it was made of paper. Kodiak's enormous paws struck Marcus in the chest, sending him crashing backward into the exhibit's concrete wall with bone-crushing impact. The massive bear's jaws clamped down on Marcus's shoulder and neck, his 4-inch canine teeth puncturing through muscle and bone, while his powerful bite force crushed vital structures. Kodiak's response was immediate and explosive. Instead of a prolonged or feeding-driven attack, he delivered short, powerful bursts of aggression, striking whenever Marcus attempted to move or shield himself. Each impact was a territorial reaction rather than predation, aimed at eliminating what the bear perceived as an intruder inside his space. The facility's emergency response team arrived within seconds, but the exhibit's design prevented a clear shot without risking hitting Marcus. The veterinary team deployed tranquilizer equipment, but Marcus had already sustained fatal injuries during the brief but devastating attack. Marcus died from his injuries despite the immediate response of his colleagues and emergency medical personnel. The incident triggered a comprehensive OSHA investigation and regional media coverage. Facility officials held emergency press conferences while facing intense public scrutiny and potential lawsuits from Marcus's family. Following standard protocol for keeper fatalities involving dangerous animals, Kodiak was euthanized within hours of the attack. The incident prompted a complete overhaul of the facility's safety systems and protocols, with new redundant measures implemented to prevent similar mechanical failures. The investigation revealed that the door system failure was caused by a software glitch that had gone undetected by routine maintenance checks. Marcus's death became a catalyst for improved technology and safety protocols in private wildlife facilities across the country, ensuring that his tragic loss would help protect future generations of animal care professionals. But mechanical failures weren't the only way that grizzly encounters turned deadly. In Yellowstone, a camper's refusal to follow basic safety rules would lead to a midnight attack that claimed her life in front of her horrified boyfriend. It was August 19, 2014, and the designated campground in Yellowstone National Park's backcountry was settling into the peaceful quiet of a summer evening. Rebecca "Becca" O'Sullivan and her boyfriend Jake had set up their tent in a prime location surrounded by towering pines and within walking distance of a crystal-clear mountain stream. The 26-year-old nurse from Denver was celebrating their 2-year anniversary with what was supposed to be a romantic camping adventure in one of America's most beautiful wilderness areas. Becca was an experienced hiker who had conquered numerous Colorado peaks, but camping in grizzly country was new territory for her. Her stubborn independence and dislike of being told what to do had created tension with Jake throughout their relationship, and this camping trip was no exception. Despite Jake's repeated warnings about bear safety protocols, Becca had insisted on bringing scented toiletries, snacks, and other aromatic items into their tent. The couple had spent the day hiking through spectacular mountain scenery, photographing wildlife, and enjoying the pristine wilderness that made Yellowstone famous. As evening approached, Jake had tried once again to convince Becca to store their food and scented items in the bear-proof containers provided by the Park Service. Becca dismissed his concerns as paranoia, insisting that bears were more afraid of humans than humans were of bears. Yellowstone National Park sits at the core of a larger 22 million-acre ecosystem that supports over 1,000 grizzlies. Around 150 to 200 of those bears have home ranges that overlap directly with the park's boundaries, and many have learned to associate human campsites with easy calorie opportunities. Young male bears are particularly dangerous, as they are often desperate for calories and willing to take risks that older, more experienced bears would avoid. Their powerful sense of smell can detect food odors from miles away, drawing them directly to improperly secured campsites. That night, Becca and Jake settled into their tent with a false sense of security, surrounded by the peaceful sounds of the wilderness. Becca had hidden energy bars, trail mix, and scented toiletries in her sleeping bag, convinced that the thin nylon walls of their tent would provide adequate protection from any curious wildlife. Jake had given up arguing with her, but his unease kept him from falling into deep sleep. Around 2 a.m., a young male grizzly weighing approximately 400 pounds approached their campsite, drawn by the concentrated scents emanating from their tent. The subadult bear was in his 3rd year of independence from his mother and was still learning to navigate the complex world of finding food while avoiding larger, more dominant bears. His desperation for calories had led him to investigate human campsites despite his natural wariness. The bear began investigating their tent by sniffing around the perimeter, his powerful nose easily detecting the concentrated food odors coming from inside. When gentle pawing at the tent walls didn't provide access to the food sources, the young grizzly began using his claws to tear at the nylon fabric. The sound of ripping fabric and heavy breathing just inches from their heads woke both campers instantly. Jake immediately recognized the situation and began speaking in calm, low tones while slowly reaching for their bear spray. His training had taught him to avoid sudden movements and loud noises that might trigger an attack. But Becca's reaction was exactly the opposite. Panic overtook her rational thinking, and she screamed while scrambling toward the tent's exit. Becca's sudden movement and loud vocalizations triggered a chase response, shifting the bear's behavior from simple food investigation to a high-energy pursuit, driven by movement and opportunity, rather than true predatory intent. She burst from the tent and began running toward the tree line. The bear caught Becca within 20 yards of their campsite, his powerful legs easily outpacing her desperate sprint. His massive paws struck her back with crushing force, sending her tumbling face first into the rocky ground, while his weight pinned her beneath his massive frame. The bear's jaws clamped down on Becca's neck and shoulders, his teeth puncturing through vital structures, while his claws raked across her torso. Jake emerged from the tent with their bear spray and began making loud noises while throwing rocks and camping equipment at the attacking bear. His desperate efforts to distract the grizzly had limited effect, as the bear was now fully committed to his attack on Becca. The young male's inexperience made him more unpredictable and dangerous than an older bear might have been. Other campers in the area were awakened by Becca's screams and Jake's shouts for help. Several arrived with additional bear spray and emergency flares, creating enough commotion to finally drive the young grizzly away from Becca's motionless form. The bear retreated into the darkness, leaving behind a scene of devastation that would haunt the witnesses for years. Becca had suffered catastrophic injuries to her neck, torso, and limbs during the brief but violent attack. Despite the quick response of fellow campers and the arrival of park rangers, she died from massive blood loss during the helicopter evacuation to the nearest trauma center. The young grizzly was tracked and relocated to a remote area of the park, as his behavior was considered typical for a food-conditioned bear rather than abnormally aggressive. The investigation revealed that Becca's violation of food storage regulations had directly contributed to the fatal encounter. The campsite was temporarily closed, and officials posted hazard advisories to warn other backcountry visitors. Her death prompted renewed emphasis on bear safety education and stricter enforcement of food storage requirements throughout Yellowstone. Jake required extensive counseling to deal with the trauma of witnessing the attack and his inability to save the woman he loved. The tragedy became a powerful reminder that wilderness safety rules exist for critical reasons, and that even experienced outdoor enthusiasts can fall victim to overconfidence and poor decision-making. Becca's death highlighted the importance of following established protocols, even when they seem unnecessary or overly cautious. But food storage wasn't the only factor that could lead to deadly grizzly encounters. In Montana, a hiker's wrong turn and panicked reaction would cost him his life when he stumbled upon a feeding bear in her territory. It was September 5, 2013, and the rugged backcountry of Glacier National Park stretched endlessly in all directions as David Chen made his way along what he believed was the established trail system. The 38-year-old software engineer from Seattle was 3 days into his first solo backpacking adventure, a journey he had planned as a way to rebuild his confidence and independence following a difficult divorce. The autumn air was crisp and clear, with golden aspens providing a stunning backdrop to the towering peaks that surrounded him. David's inexperience in wilderness navigation had led him astray from the marked trail system, though he remained unaware of his mistake as he pushed deeper into unmarked territory. His minimal preparation and overconfidence in his ability to handle whatever challenges the wilderness might present had already put him in a dangerous situation that was about to become deadly. His backpack contained basic camping gear, but lacked essential bear safety equipment like bear spray or proper food storage containers. David had dismissed such precautions as unnecessary paranoia, believing that his intelligence and urban problem-solving skills would be sufficient to handle any wildlife encounters. This dangerous overconfidence would prove fatal when he stumbled into a situation that required immediate wilderness expertise. The unmarked trail David was following wound through dense forest and rocky terrain that provided perfect habitat for the grizzly bears that called Glacier National Park home. He had been hiking for several hours without seeing any other humans, a solitude that he found both exhilarating and slightly unnerving. The silence of the deep wilderness was broken only by his footsteps and the occasional call of distant birds. Grizzly bears are opportunistic feeders that will defend food sources aggressively, especially during the fall months when they are building fat reserves for winter hibernation. A bear that has claimed a large carcass will often remain in the immediate area for days, driving away any potential competitors or threats. Female grizzlies are particularly aggressive when defending food sources, as they must consume enough calories to survive hibernation and potentially nurse cubs the following spring. David rounded a bend in the trail and found himself face to face with a 500-pound female grizzly bear feeding on a deer carcass just 30 yards ahead. The massive sow was so focused on her meal that she hadn't detected his approach. But the moment David appeared in her line of sight, her entire demeanor changed from calm feeding to aggressive territorial defense. The bear's ears flattened against her skull as she rose to her full height, her massive shoulders hunching forward in a classic threat display. David froze in place, his mind racing as he tried to process the reality of encountering one of North America's most dangerous predators at close range. His lack of wilderness experience left him completely unprepared for the split-second decision that would determine whether he lived or died. Instead of slowly backing away while avoiding direct eye contact, David remained motionless for several critical seconds before his panic overwhelmed his rational thinking. He suddenly turned and began running at full speed back down the trail, his heavy backpack bouncing wildly as he crashed through the underbrush in desperate flight. David's sudden movement triggered a high-intensity chase response, shifting the bear's behavior from guarding a food source to immediate threat removal driven by motion and proximity rather than predatory intent. She surged forward instantly, her powerful legs propelling her through the forest with speed that erased David's head start in seconds. The bear caught David within 50 yards, her massive paws striking his back with bone-crushing force that sent him tumbling face-first into the rocky trail. His backpack absorbed some of the initial impact, but the bear's 500-pound frame quickly pinned him to the ground while her razor-sharp claws began raking across his torso and limbs. The grizzly's powerful jaws clamped down on David's back and shoulders, her 4-inch canine teeth puncturing through muscle and bone while her bite force crushed vital structures. David tried to protect his vital organs by curling into a ball, but his movements only intensified the bear's attack, as any motion was perceived as a renewed threat to her food source. The attack itself lasted less than a minute, but each time David tried to move, the bear returned to strike again before circling back to guard the carcass. Her massive claws opened deep gashes across David's back, arms, and legs, while her powerful jaws inflicted crushing injuries to his torso and neck. David's struggles grew progressively weaker as massive blood loss and trauma overwhelmed his system. The 500-pound grizzly eventually returned to her deer carcass, leaving David's lifeless body on the trail where he had fallen. The bear remained in the immediate area for several more days, continuing to feed on her original kill while occasionally investigating David's remains. Her territorial behavior kept other scavengers away from both food sources. David's body was discovered by search and rescue teams 2 days later when he failed to check in at the designated ranger station. The recovery operation required careful coordination with wildlife officials to ensure the safety of rescue personnel, as the grizzly was still defending her territory in the immediate area. The bear was monitored but not relocated, as wildlife officials determined that she had been defending a natural food source in her established territory. David's death was ruled as the result of human error in navigation and wildlife encounter protocols. The incident prompted renewed emphasis on wilderness safety education and the importance of proper preparation for solo backcountry travel. David's tragic death highlighted the critical importance of wilderness experience and proper safety equipment when venturing into grizzly country. His overconfidence and lack of preparation had put him in a situation where a single wrong decision proved fatal, serving as a sobering reminder that the wilderness demands respect and expertise from all who enter its domain. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.